we assume that we're going to like the things that we want. That seems absolutely logical and unavoidable. But the human brain is a funny thing. And the circuits that process wanting are different from the circuits that process liking. They use completely different chemicals, different neurotransmitters. And so we might think that something's going to make us very happy, and therefore we want it a great deal, and we get it, and it doesn't at all. And one of the examples we use in the book is just simply craving a hamburger. You drive by someplace, you smell it, it smells fantastic. You say, this is going to give me so much pleasure to eat. And then after the first bite or two, you barely even pay attention to it, and you might not even be enjoying it that much.
Today's episode sponsor is Aditon, creators of Aditon Operations Kit, the military's go-to software for personnel and equipment accountability. AOK goes where you do, any network, anytime, any place. I got to know Aditon's co-founders, James and JJ, several years ago. They are former Army NCOs who have years of experience in the tech industry. They understand that most military jobs aren't performed behind a computer desk. Personnel and operations are distributed, but accountability of property is paramount to making mission. That's where Logi, AOK's equipment management software, comes into play. Formerly known as 92X, Logi is a next generation of equipment management for the military. Logi offers unrivaled features for military teams on the go. Ingest and digitize your primary and sub-hand receipts. Generate and share sub-hand receipts and DA forms with your team in just a few clicks. Capture photos, tags, and notes across your team to build context on the state of equipment. Get easy on-the-go access to critical property records. Logi is custom built for the modern military professional. It gives you your valuable time back so you can get back to the mission at hand at home or in the field. Whether you're doing monthly inventories or preparing for deployment, Logi is your pocket property book, giving you real-time visibility into equipment status and mission readiness. Logi is currently in use across the U.S. Army Special Forces, and it's expanding. For a limited time, listeners of the From the Green Notebook podcast can try out Logi for free. Visit aditonbbc.com/FTGN-Logi to get started. That's ADYTONPBC.com/FTGN-LOGE. How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
The Green Notebook, carried by military leaders around the world. Within those pages are sweat, tears, triumphs, and the hard-won lessons of life. Lessons worth sharing. Each week, the team dives into the notebooks of military leaders, business professionals, authors, athletes and coaches, and entertainers to share lessons and help you lead with the best version of yourself.
Welcome to another episode of From the Green Notebook. I'm your host, Joe Byerly, and today we're diving into the Green Notebook of Dr. Daniel Lieberman, a clinical professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at George Washington University, and the author of The Molecule of More, a book that explores the powerful role dopamine plays in shaping our behavior, our ambition, and our lives. Now, I picked up this book after a recommendation, and it gave me a language for something I've experienced for years, but never fully understood: dopamine. Now, most of us have heard of it. We think of it as a reward chemical, the thing behind pleasure, motivation, and feeling good. But what you'll hear in this conversation is that dopamine isn't really about what we have. It's not that at all. It's about what's next. It's the force that pushes us to chase the future, another goal, another relationship, another opportunity, another version of life that feels just out of reach. And once you start to see it, you realize how much of your life has been shaped by it, especially in the military. A career where you're always moving, always chasing the next rank, the next job, the next assignment. And then you get there, and sometimes it doesn't feel the way you thought it would. And so we talk about the difference between wanting and liking, why those two don't always line up, and why getting exactly what you wanted can sometimes feel like a letdown. We also get into what this looks like when the pace changes, when you step out of an environment built on constant forward motion, but that internal drive doesn't turn off, something I've been wrestling with since I retire. And so we talk about how easy it is to keep filling your calendar, chasing the next thing without ever stopping to ask why you're doing it in the first place. So a lot of this conversation is about learning how to shift gears, how to move between that future focused drive and the ability to actually be present in your life. Because if you can't make that shift, you can spend years chasing something that doesn't always scratch that itch for you, something that always feels just out of reach. And so we talk about relationships, ambition, ego, and meaning. And we get practical. We talk about journaling, reflection, meditation, tools that help you slow down long enough to understand what's really driving your decisions. Because this isn't about turning off ambition, it's about understanding it and making sure that things you're chasing are actually worth chasing. So grab your green notebooks and please welcome to the show, Dr. Daniel Lieberman.
Thanks so much for having me.
Dr. Lieberman, or Dan, I picked up this book. I was down doing a training, some neurofeedback training with this company called Nestry, and the CEO recommended your book. And like we were eating lunch and I immediately ordered it on Amazon. It was there when I came home. And then I read it all the way through cover to cover just within a few days. And I'm just I guess in awe because it's a molecule that, I've heard of dopamine. I've heard, how it influences us in different ways, but I didn't realize how much influence it has in our lives until I read your book.
Yeah, most people have heard of dopamine, but they generally think about it as the reward molecule. It's what we get with sex and drugs and rock and roll. But as my co-author Mike Long and I wrote in the book, it does so much more than that. Really, what it does is it orients us to the future, and it makes us think about ways in which we can make the future better than the present. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but it has enormous ramifications.
Yeah, I was actually reading. I just finished a couple weeks ago reading the Great Gatsby, and there's a line from the book because I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but essentially Gatsby spends years and years and years accumulating all this wealth, buying this huge mansion, throwing these parties, all to impress Daisy, who he wants to meet again. And the passage that I just want to read real quick, I feel like is kind of like a great capture of dopamine. And Fitzgerald writes in there that he says Daisy tumbled short of his dreams, not through her own fault, but because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. It has gone beyond her, beyond everything. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. And I feel like that's dopamine in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely perfect. When we want things, we tend to idealize them. And that's in part driven by dopamine to give us the motivation to get it. And in some ways, it makes me think of buyer's remorse, how we can get so excited about something we want to buy. We read all about it. We imagine what our lives would be like when we have this thing. And then we get it, and there's nothing there. I've heard of people who order things off Amazon, and then when it comes, they don't even bother to open the package because what they were really interested in was the hope, the possibility. Although they didn't know it, they thought the thing in itself. And as I mentioned earlier, dopamine orients us to the future. And so when we think about things that could make our lives better in the future, we get all excited, just like the guy in The Great Gatsby thinking about Daisy. But when the possibility becomes the reality, it's not the future anymore. It's the present. And dopamine has nothing to do with the present. And so our levels crash. And in a funny way, getting what we want can actually be an unpleasant experience for that reason.
Yeah, you talk about it in the book, but there's this difference between wanting something and liking something. And I see it all the time in military careers. Like people will spend their entire career chasing this one job, this one title, this one rank. And then they finally get it and they're like, man, like this is I don't know what they thought it would be, but it wasn't what they imagined in their mind, going back to Daisy, going back to dopamine. And then they get it and it's like they're unhappy, they're drained. And I guess it's because then the dopamine's like, all right, my work is done here.
Yeah. Yeah, we assume that we're going to like the things that we want. That seems absolutely logical and unavoidable. But the human brain is a funny thing. And the circuits that process wanting are different from the circuits that process liking. They use completely different chemicals, different neurotransmitters. And so we might think that something's going to make us very happy, and therefore we want it a great deal, and we get it, and it doesn't at all. And one of the examples we use in the book is just simply craving a hamburger. You drive by someplace, you smell it, it smells fantastic. You say, this is going to give me so much pleasure to eat. And then after the first bite or two, you barely even pay attention to it, and you might not even be enjoying it that much.
Yeah, I think too, it's like the novelty aspect of something. Because again, you said, in the book, I always thought of dopamine as like the pleasure molecule, but it's the predictor molecule. And so I think like because that's why things that are novel, things that are new appeal to us. The new toy, the new restaurant, maybe the hamburger that we haven't tried yet, more so than the actual thing itself.
Yeah, we're constantly seeing the grocery shelves filled with new and improved products. And that is specifically targeting dopamine. Consumer goods companies spend a lot of money on dopamine experts trying to figure out how to, for lack of a better word, manipulate our brains to make us biochemically inclined to buy their products. Because, if it's just the same old Cheerios, we may like Cheerios, but it's not going to give us any dopamine because we've had Cheerios a million times. But if it's new and improved Christmas Cheerios or something like that, we're going to get dopamine and it's going to bring us some excitement.
Do you see that like with dopamine? It's one of those things that like I guess it's the aspect, and I'm using the language all wrong, so please correct me. But it's like the part of the brain, or it's the molecule that can never be satisfied. I think the example you use in your book is like the old lady who can never have enough toilet paper just in case, and so she keeps stocking up at her house. But like that's the way dopamine works in our lives.
Yeah, that's right. It's like the accelerator on a car. Within reason, you push the accelerator, it goes faster. The accelerator never says to you, hey, we're going fast enough. I'm not going to do anything. The role of dopamine is to make us unsatisfied. Otherwise, we're not going to work for better things. You may know people, you mentioned you're naturally high in dopamine. You may know people who are naturally low in dopamine, and they can be very, very happy, but they don't really accomplish very much. They just kind of sit around enjoying the world. And that might be great for them because they live a happy life. But from an evolutionary perspective, it's not so good for the human race. We need people who are dissatisfied to go out there and discover new things, the kinds of things that dopamine is most interested in. And so I think it's important to realize that your biochemistry is not always acting in your best interest. Your biochemistry really evolved for the benefit of humanity. And we've got all these people, wonderful inventors, people who do amazing things that really are great for the population, but most of them tend to be kind of miserable.
Yeah, hold on real quick. Let me grab this. Yeah, I found this. I'm just gonna keep like reading things on this show. But I found this essay from George Orwell that I think he wrote in the 30s. And he says, writing a book is a horrible, exhausting struggle, like a long bout of some painful illness. One would never undertake such a thing if one were not driven by some demon whom one can neither resist nor understand. And like I'm reading this book now on Elon Musk, and it was the same thing. Like he talks about how unhappy he miserably was being the CEO of SpaceX and Tesla. And yeah, like even myself, like I can't sit still. Like I'm constantly finding myself, doing things with From the Green Notebook, doing things on these other side jobs. Like I can't tell you how many side quests I end up starting out that end up about killing me because I just yeah, like I can't sit still.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that quote about writing a book. It is torture sometimes.
You would
As you
know.
yeah, yeah. And so why do we do it? The answer is yes, it's torture. Yes, it's awful. But it's also wonderful at the same time. Um, because writing is an act of creation. And, we've talked about some of the ways that dopamine can lead us down a bad path and how we can get into trouble chasing that dopamine. And we haven't even talked about the most serious things like drug abuse and sex abuse and online abuse, all of that. But dopamine can be wonderful. And I think the healthiest, most satisfying way to work with dopamine is through creation. And that can be writing, it can be drawing, it can be gardening, it can be all kinds of things. But that's the flip side to writing. It is an act of creation, and creation can be pretty wonderful.
Yeah, so I wanna get into, yeah, the positive aspects of it, but you talked about drugs and talked about sex addiction. One of the things that you talk about in the book is relationships. I know a lot of people struggle with this because, they meet a person, they're on dating apps, and they see all the possibilities before them, and then things quickly change 'cause I guess, again, it's like dopamine's, like, getting you to that point, but then you need something else to get beyond that to actually make it work and make it last.
Yeah. Yeah. If I could just start out by saying a word about the dating apps.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Dating apps are designed to simulate dopamine. Look at all these amazing possibilities. And as we look at them, we are experiencing something similar to what Gatsby did with Daisy. We're seeing these curated profiles, and we are imagining a perfect person who is going to meet all our needs. And then we meet them in person, and they're nothing like that at all. They might be wonderful, but they're going to be a letdown because they're not this ideal person. The problem with dating apps is that it always stimulates dopamine, telling you there could be something better. I'm working with a patient right now who's very interested in establishing a long-term relationship, and she recently met a guy who's pretty good, um, but she keeps wondering, might there be somebody better on that dating app? And what can happen is constantly chasing better, you lose the good.
Wow. So what is it then that, like, so if dopamine gets you there, what is the counter to that that keeps you there?
So I think that we need to look at different kinds of romantic love. Romantic love starts off with passionate love, and that's being in love. And some people have said that that is the peak of human experience for your entire life, and that is falling in love. You almost feel like a god. The world is so amazing, and the future is golden. That lasts about 12 to 18 months, and then it goes away. And that's when the real challenge begins. A lot of people, especially in our highly dopaminergic society, will say, oh, well, it looks like I made a mistake. I misjudged. This person isn't the magic partner I thought that they would be. And then they jump on to the next. And it's a merry-go-round that doesn't really lead anywhere. It just goes around and around. What you want to do is shift away from dopamine, the molecule of possibility, and shift to some of those here and now neurotransmitters that help you process and enjoy the present moment. And so this passionate, crazy love evolves into what's called companionate love, companion from friend. And in some ways, that's even nicer. It's not this feverish insanity that passionate love is, but it's sort of this calm feeling of fulfillment and satisfaction. The joy of being with someone whose life is deeply entwined with your own, someone that you can trust, who's always got your back and is always there for you. And that's what love can evolve into if one has the maturity to let go of the dopamine phase.
Yeah, and I would imagine, you're talking about dating apps, but for, folks who are married or in committed relationships, I would imagine too that social media, like looking at others' Facebook adventures, looking at reels on Instagram of alternate lives, alternate possibilities, could sometimes get in the way of that. And then all of a sudden you start, like wondering, like, could this other future exist or this alternate universe in my universe exist? And then start suppressing those H and N molecules, the here and now molecules.
Yeah, yeah. Social media can be very dangerous. And I think we have to remember that what we're seeing is basically advertisements for other people's lives, highly curated. Have you ever seen those videos where they show how they photograph food in advertisements?
Yes.
It's all fake. They don't use whipped cream, they use shaving cream because it's got a better consistency. And that's what we're seeing on social media. It's not real. The sad thing is that people who are most popular on social media, influencers, who look like they have these wonderful lives, traveling to exotic locations and just living peak experiences, these people are at elevated risk for suicide.
Mm.
Um, their lives are not wonderful. And so to compare ourselves to these artificial advertisements is a guaranteed recipe for misery.
Yeah, because I would imagine again, I'm thinking just in terms of me with writing, um, and the things that I do professionally. Like I'm constantly chasing, like I'm never satisfied, and I'm constantly looking for the next thing. And like it was kind of built into a military career, like we're the way the military. I don't know if you're familiar, Dan, but the way the military works, it's a pyramid. So you're constantly climbing, constantly looking to the next thing. You're moving every 2 to 3 years. So, maybe 1 year I'm living in the state of Georgia. The next year I'm in North Carolina. 2 years I'm living in Washington State. 3 years after that, I'm living in Germany. Then maybe I'm moving to the mountains of Colorado. So, I'm constantly getting hit with novelty, new things, new people. And then that ends. And then you find yourself, you know, in a normal 9 to 5 life, and you're, like, looking for those things. So, that's me professionally, but I would imagine that when you're in a dopaminergic life, like, that's your entire life, being
Yes.
somebody who, like, is doing things for the for the perfect reel, the perfect shot on Instagram, that all of a sudden, like, you're chasing and you're never comfortable.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mentioned that we live in a dopaminergic world with all of these new and improved products, always trying to make us want more, want something better. I have not served in the military, but I imagine it's very much like that times 10. Because I know little about the military, but I imagine it's very much about objectives. It's not about enjoying the present moment. It's not about smelling the flowers. It's about accomplishing an objective, and you sacrifice everything to that. And so making the transition, and that can be very difficult, but I think it can also be very wonderful in some ways, especially when you're doing it as part of a team. And then transitioning to civilian life, where it's not objective focused quite as much. And you do need to find a way to slow down and enjoy the present moment, enjoy the peace that you sacrificed for. I think you've got to work at it, and you have to do things that will strengthen your here and now circuits so that you are able to make that transition successfully.
Okay, I've joked around this a couple of times on the podcast over the years, especially when I interview, various psychologists. So now we're just going to turn this into a therapy session, and then everybody can listen in on it. But
Mhm.
yeah, like in the military, we have leave, vacation time. We have 2 weeks in the winter, 2 weeks in the summer. And so I remember thinking all the time that I was living my life in 6 months, 6 month increments, is we would try to at least have an idea of what we want to do during that 2 week period in the summer, where we want to go that 2 week period in the winter. And then that was what I was like constantly focused on for 6 months at a time. And then in the context of my day to day job, like when I'm doing these things, you're right. Like just because you finish a training exercise on Monday doesn't mean you get to bask in, oh, we did great and did all these things. You're actually planning for the very next thing that's like, maybe a couple days from now or a week or two later. So it just that future focus never stops. And you really can't enjoy the present at all because as soon as that's over, you're moving on to the very next thing. And so, yeah, like now it's kind of the same thing. Like I've been out since August of 24, and I find myself like getting antsy if I'm home for more than 7 days at a time. And it's crazy because like we'll call it like the Daisy phenomenon or something. I spent 20 years like imagining this like Shangri-La of retirement. when I finally got out, I was like, I don't know what I would be like sitting around, maybe smoking weed. I don't know. But like just doing something completely chill, being here in the moment. And that is like nearly impossible. Like I'm finding myself filling my schedule, throwing things on the calendar that like I don't even know if I really want to do it, 2 months from now, but I'm throwing it on there now. So yeah. So let's help me unpack that, please.
All right, sure thing. So you really need a balance in your life. You don't want to just sit around smoking pot after retirement.
I don't
uh,
do that, by the way. I just got to throw that out there. Yeah.
I can see that loud and clear. Yeah, that wouldn't work for you. Um, so you don't want to do that, but nor do you want to constantly be chasing, chasing, chasing. Life needs to have a rhythm. And some psychologists have compared it to the heartbeat, systole and diastole. You squeeze, you relax. You squeeze, you relax. You're going to squeeze harder and accomplish more if you get good at relaxing in between. And so, as stupid as that sounds, maybe relaxation and enjoying the present moment can become a dopaminergic goal. You can say that's something that I want to achieve. And we would think, oh, relaxation, that's what happens when you're not doing something goal directed. And that's not true. Relaxation doesn't come naturally. It doesn't come automatically. It's something that you have to work for. And if you look at the flip side, the dopamine side, as I said, there's nothing wrong with that. Go ahead and pursue things, but you want to make sure that you're pursuing them for the sake of meaning and not simply for the sake of keeping busy. So what I would say is, you take on a project, you don't even know if you want to do it. All right, there's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you'll enjoy something. But when the project is over, take a little bit of time to journal. Describe the project. Describe what you expected and what the reality was. And if you do that consistently, over time, you'll gain self-knowledge. You'll learn what you find meaningful and satisfying. You can say yes to that stuff, and you can learn what really doesn't light your fire, and you can eliminate that from your life.
I think that's great advice. And I love that you talk about journaling because that's what I talk about almost every single episode. Because I started journaling in 2021. And I think that's like the greatest way to get some insight in yourself besides, going to a counselor. But I think, it's one thing to have the knowledge of it. But I think let me slow down just a little bit. One, it's really important to slow down and actually do that assessment afterwards because like you're right, if you're not busy, if you're not careful, dopamine will continue to push you and push you and push you. And for those in the military, that's what we do. We never slow down. We just keep going on from thing to thing to thing. And so the ability to slow down and journal is great. And that is something that I've been doing after some of these jobs that I have taken on. Like I absolutely hated that. I'm never doing that again. So it's definitely a learning process. But the other thing I think is like, what are some ways that folks can slow down? And and I think it's wild that like I have to ask that question. But I think if you spend your entire life never stopping and smelling the daisies or the roses or whatever, it's almost a foreign concept. When you say slow down, it's like, what does what does that mean?
Yeah, yeah. So there are things you can do. There's a lot you can do. When I was writing this book, I recognized that I was too focused on dopamine in my own life, and I needed to bring some balance into it. So what I started doing is I started meditating and doing breath work. And I grabbed the Headspace app, and it took me from zero, absolute beginner, knowing nothing about meditation, and it started having me meditate, I think, for 60 seconds. And it didn't just say meditate, it really taught me what to do. And I found it very useful. And I'm up to about 15 minutes
Wow.
after 8 years. It's not easy. It's very, very hard. And dopaminergic people have to realize that meditating is not about accomplishing something. It's not, oh, okay, I'm finally meditating now. No, it's about the struggle. In a way, just like working out is. Working out is not, oh, I finally lifted this amount of weight, I'm done. It's like, no, it's constantly challenging your muscles. Meditation is constantly challenging your brain. and it has a lot in common with physical exercise. You activate certain circuits over and over and over again. Those circuits become stronger until they naturally engage, and you naturally find yourself being in the present moment and enjoying things more. I also started doing breath work. I do about 7 minutes of that per day. Many breathwork exercises involve a rapid inhale, and that triggers the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, which in some ways is related to dopamine. Then you do a very slow exhale, and that gives you a long activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. That's what calms down your body, slows your heart rate, brings your blood pressure down, slows your breathing, makes you calm. And what the breath work does is it biases the parasympathetic system, making you calm, but it also allows you to switch back and forth very smoothly and easily. So you're in your life, something happens, it activates you, it stresses you out, then it's over, and you easily return to that calm state. So, this is taking me a total of 20 minutes a day, which is not that much time, but I think it makes a big difference. In the beginning, when I was not very consistent, my family could tell when I was doing it and when I was not.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I just did some work with a company called Nestry that does the neuroperformance feedback, neurofeedback. And we did a thing to where like basically I was rewarded. I won't get into the specifics of the exercise, but I was basically rewarded every time my brain levels or my brain activity dropped.
Mhm.
And I found myself like relaxed. And you talk about the brain being a muscle. And I just worked out with them for 2 minutes, with their system. And it felt like I had read an entire book, like cover to cover. Like my brain was just exhausted. I even had to take a nap
Wow.
that day, but it was the first time I had ever like felt my brain like calm, and it was amazing. And so now I like this was about a week and a half ago. So this is brand new. So now yeah, I am doing things to kind of like slow down a little bit. So that's good to know that that'll kind of help counter counter the dopamine chase that I've been used to for so long.
Yeah, I think one of the most famous quotations in philosophy comes from the Oracle at Delphi, and that is, know thyself. We need to know who we are. And now we've got this fascinating technology like neurofeedback where we can actually see inside of our brains. We can complement introspection, paying attention to what's going on with actual technology that shows us and helps us practice putting our brains in a state that we want it to be in.
Yeah, again, it's amazing. So we'll see where that goes. One thing I'm curious about is I kept reading this book, and one of the topics that I'm fascinated with is power. And I could see again, like I got to see power, up close in the military with folks getting lots of authority, lots of responsibility. And then, I got to serve at strategic level. So I got to see it at the national level. And I got to see how this, power in itself, this concept, like people will spend their entire lives chasing it to get it, and it changes them. And one of the things that I love in the book is you said dopamine doesn't have a conscience. And so it'll push us to do things that we may not have ever considered doing, all for the sake of winning competition and gaining power. So I was curious what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, yeah. Dopamine is like a bloodless calculating machine. We talk about different dopamine circuits in the brain. They all have the same goal, and that is to maximize future resources, but they give us different tools to get there. A lot of what we've been talking about is limbic dopamine, dopamine deep in the brain, which in the book we call desire dopamine because it gives us desire. But there's also dopamine in a more recent evolutionary part of our brain, cortical dopamine, which we call control dopamine. And that's what allows us to use abstract concepts and tools to influence the future. It allows us to make plans and break it down into steps in order to accomplish something long term that can't be accomplished short term. And so it's this calculating machine that will tell us how to get there, but it doesn't tell us why to get there, whether it's good or not. And it doesn't tell us if it's right or wrong. And sometimes we can get so caught up in the chase, so caught up in the excitement of accomplishing something that we forget to ask ourselves the question, is this morally okay?
I'd like to introduce you to our newest partner, Roger Bank, a modern digital military bank built by military members for military members. Whether you're stationed stateside or overseas, Roger is designed to meet the unique needs of our men and women in uniform. I recently opened an account myself, and the process was incredibly smooth. It took less than 10 minutes from start to finish. Now, here's why I'm excited to partner with Roger. They offer high-yield checking and savings accounts, zero account fees, early payday, and automatic savings with Roundup Match. Their military-ready direct deposit form is even auto-populated and signed by the CEO, saving you time and hassle. Plus, you get free global ATM access, real person customer support, and they even offer accounts for service members as young as 17. Funds are FDIC insured through Citizens Bank of Edmond, so you can bank with confidence and peace of mind. Visit roger.bank to learn more. That's ROGER.bank. I'm going to back up something you just said. It doesn't tell us the why. And so I'd even think if like you're talking about, is this morally okay? Even like, why am I doing this? And I think a lot of times ego comes into play with this. Like our
Mhm.
egos are like, you need this title, you need this job, you need this salary. And so we chase things for that and we don't even think twice about it. And then we get there and we're kind of like stuck. Again, it's like dopamine gets us into the position and then like, wipes its hands clean and walks off. And now we're stuck with this thing. So it's slowing down and then going back to that Delphic inscription of know thyself and knowing why we're doing something in the first place. It's so important. But it's I think it's counterintuitive a lot of times because we're constantly moving, and not even thinking about like why we're moving in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. That really comes down to meaning. We really need to explore what is meaningful to us, what makes us happy, what makes us fulfilled. And it's rarely going to be titles or power. Titles and power are ways to impress other people. And I'm going to say for both of us, impressing other people is important. It certainly is for me. But at the same time, I know that's a source of unhappiness for me. There's this wonderful theory called the invisible guest theory. Have you ever heard of that?
Mm-mm.
It's like, you walk into a party and you got a big stain on your tie and you're absolutely humiliated about this. Everybody's noticing it. Studies have shown you go back and you ask people, only about 15% of people notice the stain on your tie. And it's the same way too. You say something brilliant and only about 15% of people are actually going to notice that. So we think that people are judging us. We think that they're admiring us. They're not doing either one. They're focusing on themselves, and chasing the ability to impress other people is not a recipe for happiness.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a conversation with somebody else the other day. They spent 20 plus years, and in their minds they were going to get a certain job, and it was potentially going to be their final job in the military. In charge of thousands of people. And the job they ended up getting selected for was not that job. Matter of fact, it was a job that a lot of us like don't desire. And he was telling me that like not one person who had kind of pulled him up through the ranks as mentors like reached out to apologize or check on him or anything like that. And I think it goes back to like a lot of times in our minds that we're doing things for other people and not doing them for ourselves. We're kind of stuck in should and ought to mode for these things because they're like, oh man, if I do this thing, then like, I'll get all this praise or whatever. But then like when it doesn't work out, like it's like crickets or like if you're miserable in that job, none of those people care because it's not their life. And so
Yeah.
I think again, it's really important a lot of times to slow down because now reading your book, I know the dopamine is just constantly like pumping through my brain, getting me to chase that novel thing, that next thing. And it's an impersonal force.
Yeah.
Because like you said, it doesn't care whether
Yeah.
I'm happy or not once I get it.
When I was in training as a psychiatrist, I had a supervisor that I really did not like. And we used to get in a lot of fights. And he was supposed to be teaching me psychiatry. And frankly, I had very little respect for his psychiatric abilities. One day he took me aside and he said, Dan, I owe you an apology. He said, I hate being a psychiatrist. The reason I became a psychiatrist is because I did well in school. All the rest of my family are involved in a family hardware business owned by my father, but they wanted something better for me. And so they said, you should be a doctor. You can do it. And I wanted to impress them. And so I did. And I've hated it every single day. And he said, Dan, today is the happiest day of my life. I'm leaving medicine and I'm going into the family hardware business. So this was a guy who went down the wrong path, but he was emotionally sophisticated enough to be able to recognize it and to give up this high paying, superficially prestigious job for something on the surface that didn't look nearly as good, but he knew it was going to make him happy. I didn't have a whole lot of respect for him before that, but afterwards I was kind of in awe.
Do you see that now with like your practice and now that I mean you've written the book on dopamine that like so many people are driven by like I know the whole brain, like neurochemistry and all that stuff, but people are actually driven by neurochemical forces that like again like it has nothing to do with whether we're happy or not, nothing to do with whether we'll like it or not. And you could go not just months, years, but you go decades doing something that's not really for you, all because of, again, neurochemistry.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And that's part of the reason why I wrote the book, because people need to understand this. Um, I think that people view their mind and their body as being fundamentally different. Everyone recognizes that their body has limitations. Everyone recognizes that sometimes the urges of the body will lead us down a wrong path and therefore need to be resisted. They recognize that the body is part of our animal nature, and we need to treat it that way. We need to manage it. People do not recognize that as much with their mind. They kind of see their mind as just being themselves. They think that they have relative control over what they think. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We have some control over what we think, but it's really, really hard. And our brains are biological instruments just as much as our bodies are. And in order to manage them skillfully, we've got to understand that biology.
Is there a way, and I'm asking, like, is there a way to, I guess it is journaling or maybe speaking to a counselor that can pick up on different words that you're saying, but is there a way to keep digging and asking why and getting to understand like what's happening either at a chemical level or happening at like a subconscious level?
Yeah, I think that journaling is very powerful. I think that working with a therapist is even more powerful because now you've got another person involved and we respond differently to other people than we do just to our own thoughts. But I think that if somebody wanted to try something simple, I think that just simple reflection, and that is paying attention to the things you say, the choices you make, and just reflecting on why did you do that? Reflecting on your successes, why did that go well? But even more importantly, reflecting on your failures. Nobody likes to fail. We work so hard to avoid failure. But I think that if you look back on your life, you've got to admit that you learned more from your failures than you did from your successes. So, you know, probing our own motives, immersing ourselves in the least savory aspects of who we are isn't particularly pleasant, but that's where growth is going to come from. That's when you're going to discover what's meaningful for you so that you can set goals that will actually give you fulfillment.
Yeah, and when I started journaling, like I didn't even know where to begin, and I was using I was using the Daily Stoic journal for a little while, but then it was like more, Stoic related questions every day. So I started writing, just kind of a summary on my day, and then eventually, I started. It was almost like a format of a summary, what I learned, what I was struggling with, what I was grateful for, um, what decisions did I make that day? So I could go back and look at those later, key decisions that from going to grab lunch with a certain person to, making a purchase, that I was going to end up having buyer's remorse a couple months later. And then I ended up, doing this for a while and then being able to see those patterns and kind of doing it in a format like that. It's cool to be able to like go back and kind of look at those different headings each day, and so that was one of the things I created a couple years ago was the Leader's 90-day notebook, and it's that journaling format because I feel like if for a lot of people, they're like, "I don't know where to begin. Do I say dear diary when I start?" And just I feel like, journaling seems like this mountain for a lot of folks to climb for reflection, so I was like, if I could just do something that
Yeah.
makes it very easily very accessible, and you do it for 90 days, then you don't even need the journal anymore. You could go grab whatever notebook works for you and then start doing your own form of journaling, just something to get started because it has been I'm not perfect and I still make a ton of mistakes, but I'm making less mistakes or different mistakes now than I was, a couple of years ago when I started journaling.
Very hard to sit down in front of a blank page. And so, yeah, I think that the way you did it is perfect. You just start out with pre-written questions that you answer, and then you just get in the habit of putting your thoughts on paper. And I think one thing we should mention is that putting your thoughts on paper is vastly different than thinking them in your mind. And the reason is that you're using different brain cells. And in some ways, that's like getting a different perspective on things. Different parts of your brain view your experiences in different ways. And so when you activate the writing part of your brain, you're going to see new things that you did not see before when you were just thinking about it. As a writer, one experience I've had many, many times is that I thought I understood some idea and then I tried to write it down to explain it to someone else, and I realized I don't understand this at all. And I had to go back and spend half a day doing research before I could explain it to someone else. And I think it's the same thing with journalism. Stuff you wouldn't think about twice when just thinking it, you go down to write it, and you're like, oh my God, this is so important. I need to spend some time figuring this out.
And there's things that I've even thought about, like, lately that I journaled that, like, either felt so heavy or felt so overwhelming, like, emotionally, and then, the next morning I wake up and I, like, start writing it out, and it's strange. It's like I have this clarity that I didn't have before, and just seeing it down on paper, sometimes I'm like, "Man, what an idiot," or, like, "What are you thinking?" But I can look at it almost, like, scientifically when I do get in the habit of journaling, and it's not always perfect, but yeah, that makes sense now that you said it. I never thought about it this way. It's like a different part of the brain processing it on a piece of paper. But then again, for me, seeing it, a lot of times those things that are like super heavy or feel overwhelming, sometimes even start losing their power over me once I see them written on paper because it's like that thought is crystallized instead of constantly swirling around. Like I can look at it long enough to actually think about it versus like, it pops in my head and then I move on to the next thing.
Yeah. You know what that is? That's the opposite Daisy effect. Just like our minds can magnify and idealize things that we think are good, it does the same thing with things that frighten us or intimidate us. Some famous horror movie director once said, the monster you can't see is more scary than any monster that you can see. And that's why in horror movies, they don't give you a good look at the monster until the very end, because that's more frightening. And so I think that in some ways, writing things down is flipping the light switch. It's turning off the lights and looking the monster straight in the face And as you said, the experience often is, oh, geez, why was I so scared?
Yeah, I just again, it's like super helpful, and you know that paired with reading again, like now I can like start looking at things through the lens of dopamine. And a friend of mine, you know, we're reading this book. We've been reading this book together over the last couple weeks, and now we have like a joke, like if you know that they're like, hey, I'm not, you know, like they're thinking about the future too much than the present. They're like, man, I need some more H and N, some here and now, right now. And so I think it's a great way to have a language too, that when you are
Yeah.
journaling, you know, you can say, okay, like I'm chasing dopamine, or, you know, hey, I need to do a little bit better to release the serotonin and the oxytocin, like right now. I need to do some more activities that keep me anchored in the present. I'm curious, like as I was reading, I was like, yes, my personality is like super dopaminergic. Like even before I read this, like my wife and I had a discussion a couple months ago. I was like, I can't sit still here in this small town in North Carolina. Like I need to travel. I need the big city every now and then to just be able to walk around, to take the metro, to, you know, go to places I've never been to because I need novelty. And so again, now I have like a little bit better language for it, but I see that in myself. But you know, is there a way to test for like dopamine levels, or to, I guess, assess yourself like, hey, am I like a dopamine fueled person? Or am I like, you know, the other side of it, that living in the H and N transmitters or the circuits?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any easy biological tests. It'd be nice if it was a blood test that could put you somewhere along the dopamine here and now spectrum. We don't have that. Um, but we do have personality tests. And none of them, I don't think, that's been well validated, is specifically targeted at this. But there are things you can look at. The most famous personality test looks at the big five personality components. And one of them is openness to new experiences. And that's very, very dopaminergic. If you want to test how strong your cortical dopamine is, your ability to figure out problems, a wonderful test is called the Raven's matrices. I actually enjoy it. It's where you have to find patterns. They give you three patterns, and you got to figure out the fourth from a multiple choice. And it starts out very easy and gets very, very hard. But I think it's a lot of fun. So, to answer your question, no blood tests, nothing biological, but we've got some good psychological tests that will shed light on that.
And Joseph Campbell is one of my favorite obscure authors. Talks about the hero's journey. Somebody asked him one time, like, "Do you meditate?" And he goes, "No, I highlight." And he was talking about reflection. And he was saying that like when he highlights, like the passages that jump out to him, that speak to him, like that gives me clues to who I am. So I think, you know, again, reading this book, I was able to like see a lot of myself in the way that you were talking about dopamine. So I was like, yeah, like this is probably the best test ever. Because I was like, this is me. I'm very dopaminergic. So I've got to start taking steps now to kind of slow things down for myself a little bit. Otherwise, I will run the car off the road, so to speak,
Yeah.
chasing the next thing.
When I was writing the book, I sort of got in the habit of checking in with myself and asking myself, is this a dopamine situation or a here and now situation? And am I in the right mode? If I'm at work, if I'm writing, that's dopamine. And I can look forward to things and I can try to make my life better, make the lives of other people better. But when I'm at home with my family or with friends, that's an H&N moment. And I need to remember that because a lot of times I'll be in dopamine mode. I'll be on the surface, it looks like I'm talking with my wife, but underneath I'm really thinking about what do I have to do at work the next day? And that's not a dopamine moment. That's not a time to be thinking about the next day. And so I try to bring myself in and just savor what's going on in the moment. And by doing that, it's like not only listening to the words that she's saying, but listening to the tone. Remembering all the things I like about this person, and searching for them, the little dry humor, the warmness, the tenderness, just trying to savor every aspect of the conversation that we're having.
Yeah, it's again amazing advice. Like I said, some of this is definitely turned into a therapy session for me because I am struggling so now. But now I can be like, okay, am I doing this for dopamine, or do I need to work on some H and N right now? But Dan, appreciate it. For folks that are interested in your work, hearing you speak, anything like that, where can they find you?
They can look at my website, danielzlieberman.com. And I've got some talks on the internet. I did a TEDx talk on dopamine, which they can check out. I wrote a second book called Spellbound, and Joseph Campbell's ideas are in there. It's really driven by Jungian ideas.
Ah, okay.
And I'm working on my third book called The Molecules of Catastrophe. And that is about the biological machinery in our brain that turns tragedy into growth. The steps we go through as we recover from catastrophic experiences, put our lives back together, and learn to grow from it.
When is that one coming out?
That one's probably going to be 2028, maybe
Okay.
late 2027. I'm halfway through the first draft.
Okay, well, like again, I just came across your work for the first time, which is, I guess, one of the benefits of writing, because people are constantly discovering your work. So I'm definitely going to order a copy of Spellbound after this, and read it. But yeah, like there's a bookshelf over there of all of Joseph Campbell's stuff, like beyond A Hero with a Thousand Faces, and his stuff is really hard to read.
It
Um,
is. It's
but
very hard.
for every 10 pages, there's a line or two that's amazing. And so I spent a year and a half writing on his ideas, on Jungian ideas, for my weekly email. So I'm really excited now. So
I think
hopefully,
you'll enjoy Spellbound. Yeah.
okay, well, hopefully you can come back and we can do another interview. And then in let's see, this is dopamine right now. In 2028, you can come back and talk about the molecules of catastrophe. So
That'd be terrific.
awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. This was amazing, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Joe. Had a great time too.
Thank you again for listening to another episode of From the Green Notebook podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please give us 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps us gain visibility and the opportunity to help more people on their leadership journey. Also, make sure you check out our website at www.fromthegreennotebook.com. There, you can listen to past episodes, read leadership articles written by military leaders from around the world. You can sign up for our monthly reading list email where you can learn about new books that are coming out, and our Sunday reflection email that comes out every Sunday morning. Is really short. It's a 2-minute read, but I guarantee you it's going to start your week off on the right foot. Finally, make sure you follow us on Twitter at FTGN Notebook, and you can find us on Instagram and Facebook by searching for From the Green Notebook. Again, thank you so much for coming on this journey with us. I am humbled by the opportunity to learn these lessons alongside you. So please join us next week for another episode of From the Green Notebook, where we're going to help you lead with the best version of yourself.
I came from the mud. There's